60 years ago, on a bridge in Selma, Alabama, ordinary citizens took extraordinary steps that would forever change the course of American history. What began as a peaceful march for voting rights on March the 7th, 1965, would become known as Bloody Sunday, a pivotal moment in our nation's civil rights struggle. Today, we stand on sacred ground. The Edmund Pettus Bridge rises not just as a structure of steel and concrete, but as a monument to courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable human spirit. News One presents Voices of Courage, Bloody Sunday 60 years later. The story of Selma begins long before that fateful Sunday. As historian Robert White explains,
beginning in 1940, there began a strong movement in the Black Belt of Alabama to push for voting rights, particularly voter registration. The effort started actually in Tuskegee, Alabama, and then made its way to Montgomery through the Montgomery bus boycott, and then into Selma with the coming of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other organizations to register African Americans to vote.
For Black citizens in Alabama, the fight for basic rights came with terrible costs, as Hattie Chambers Given recalls.
I was a foot soldier during the Civil Rights Movement. However, I did not march because I was forbidden to march. My parents worked, my mom worked for Craig Air Force Base, and my dad worked for Miller Lumber Company. And they told the employees if their children participated in the march, they would be fired from their jobs. And of course, I obeyed my parents.
This was a land of stark contradictions. Dallas County, Alabama, a place where African Americans made up the vast majority of the population, yet almost none were registered to vote. A systematic campaign of intimidation, poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright violence maintained this unjust reality.
In Lowndes County, I came to Lowndes County in 1965, right after they beat the people on the bridge, and we went into Lowndes County. It was about 89% black, no voters, black people basically slaves, and we came in there to fight against slavery, and voting was one of the techniques we used, and they assassinated and killed several people. So we organized the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County.
When we started protesting because the black teacher didn't have the right to vote in 1964. So we were protesting. They figured they knew the student, the kids not going to be at school, and plus the teacher can keep their job.
Local organizations like the Dallas County Voters League had been working for change, but the arrival of young activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, brought new energy and strategies to the struggle.
Well, they were instrumental because Martin Luther King would not go somewhere where they had not already been, which means that they were the foot soldiers, really, SNCC students.
These young activists ventured into communities building trust by educating residents about their rights and creating the foundation upon which larger demonstrations could stand. They were the advance team, the groundbreakers, preparing the way for what was to come.
Well, we used to call it back then, we called them the freedom fighters. And they was always coming to our neighborhood. They had to rely on kids like myself. They would come into the community and give us a box of flyers. And they would say, pass these flyers out to all the housing in the area.
By early 1965, tensions had reached a breaking point. The murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson by state troopers in nearby Marion, Alabama, sparked a plan to march from Selma to Montgomery, a 54-mile journey to demand voting rights and justice. On March 7th, approximately 600 marchers gathered at Brown Chapel AME Church. They would attempt to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, only to be met with shocking violence from state troopers and deputized civilians.
So Bloody Sunday, the actual day itself, was in March 7th, 1965. After months and months of planning, again led by the SCLC and members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, we had a group of powerful young and old. The youngest marcher at the time was 8 years old, Mama Cheyenne Webb Kreisberg. We had folks that came together because they understood that they were not a full citizen in the country of their birth. And they planned to march all the way from Brown Chapel in Selma, Alabama, all the way to Montgomery, Alabama.
You know, we had been having mass meeting and protests, and we had got kind of used to going to jail. Now, how it ended up, we have march, but how we end up on the bridge, Jimmy Lee Jackson had got assassinated, but he got shot. He died in Selma, and once he died, you know, we were gonna go to Montgomery to the Capitol to protest that he had got killed. So we think it's gonna be just a normal march. We never marched across the river, but we always went to the courthouse.
But they did not even make it, not even a quarter of a mile out of town, pretty much right at the site of where that stage is behind us now. They didn't even make it there to where they knelt down to pray, and a sea of state police officers, local police, and immediately deputized white men opened hellfire on them, beating them, not with fists, with their feet, batons, and chased them all the way back in. We had brothers and sisters that literally had to hide in the bushes, some even down by the river, to escape death.
The brutality was calculated and televised for the world to see.
Equally so, state troopers have now sealed off the area, making sure that nobody gets out of it.
The images shocked the nation's conscience.
So the whole thing was to do exactly what it did, to create a confrontation, a public confrontation, a confrontation that the world would see. Pictures would be taken, video would be shot, it would go all over the world, and that's exactly what happened.
Get ready for the confrontation with Governor Wallace's troopers.
So they saw the brutality that was inflicted on the marchers, but they also saw the courage of the marchers and the strategy of the marchers as they organized to do what they did.
I had dreams about it over the years, especially when I was younger. All that week they're running clips from it on the news. And I was scared because, first of all, I wasn't supposed to be there. My mother had told us, don't go down there. My dad had told us, don't go down there. And I was hoping they didn't show me on TV.
This march will not continue. We are here to say that this march does not continue.
Among those on the bridge that day were both adults who had lived their entire lives under segregation and children who were just beginning to understand the struggle they were part of.
So when we got there, John Lewis had led the march. Dr. King didn't come for that march. So John Lewis led that march. And he had already told us, even if we turn around, you know, when we get to the bridge, we're going to kneel and pray. And so while we were praying, and when we got up, all you heard was horses and, you know, just tear gas and people getting hit. But we ran under the bridge where most of the people were running back, trying to get water because tear gas in your eye. It was real sad. People were running and crying, and some people got hurt.
What made these ordinary citizens risk everything? For civil rights activist Annie Pearl Avery, it was about a deeper form of liberation.
It became a way of life with me. You know, the protesting, I guess, and stuff. Wherever I see trouble, I got to get involved one way or the other. See other folk trying to get free, but hell, I feel free. And if you feel free and think free, you'll act free.
I felt good about it because, you know, the voting rights bill was passed and we had protection. We never had protection before. So I felt good, and I felt that a change was going to come. So I was more enthusiastic, really.
The events of Bloody Sunday led directly to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, landmark legislation that transformed American democracy. But 60 years later, as we commemorate this historic struggle, the work continues.
We are in also the unique period in our nation's history because as we've had so many victories over the last 60 years, all of those things are being threatened. So as people put out their issues of division and othering based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's not lose sight. It's about the money. It's about taking our Social Security. It's about kicking elderly out of nursing home by underfunding Medicaid.
NAACP President Derek Johnson reminds us that the challenges of today require the same unified purpose that drove the Selma movement.
So we must stand united. We have no time for us versus us paradigm, young versus old, male versus female. It must be us for us in this moment.
Commemorating Bloody Sunday isn't just about remembering the past. It's about drawing strength for today's struggles.
You know, our greatest strength is each other. That's why they spend so much time and money trying to keep us apart from each other, right? Anything that's great, you gotta work to keep it down. But the reality of it is that the spirit of our ancestors runs through all of us.
60 years after Bloody Sunday, the Edmund Pettus Bridge stands as both a memorial to past courage and a reminder of present responsibilities. Those who gather here feel a connection to something greater than themselves.
Coming to Selma, this is a pilgrimage, as this is our holy ground, this is our Mecca, because not just of where it is, but because, as you mentioned, the spirit of our ancestors lives on.
To me, it's important because we struggled, and we're still struggling. And a lot of the young people don't understand that. I talked to some young people from Selma, and they said, yeah, you all are still on that bridge crap. I said, you know, a lot of people suffered, and some people died. And they look at me and like, it's hard to convince the young people about what has happened and what is happening in our country today.
As we honor the foot soldiers of Bloody Sunday, both the famous and the unsung heroes whose names we may never know, we recognize that their struggle is our inheritance. Their unfinished work is our responsibility. For in the words of Annie Pearl Avery, true freedom begins not just with legal rights, but with how we think and act.
But for me, I feel the ultimate freedom is to think free, act free. When if something is happening, try to figure out a way to do something about it. You might not be able to do it then, but maybe later on down the road. And then I feel like I can do anything. That's right. We want freedom. When do we want it? Now.
We started freedom schools because the other schools have taught our children to have fear and to obey the slave master and not be strong, not be warriors and whatever. So we formed our own schools, and then when we formed freedom schools, freedom, we talking about freedom, singing songs of liberation. These songs of freedom, that's all I ever sang. And we started having them children singing freedom songs and teaching them they were good, talking about black is beautiful, ain't scared of nobody, cause I want my freedom, I want my freedom, I want my freedom, I want my freedom now.
From the March on Selma to the present day, the march toward justice continues. One foot in front of the other, across bridges both literal and figurative, toward the America we have yet to become. News One presents Voices of Courage, Bloody Sunday 60 years later.